Hello, authors. I'm Joanne Morrell, children's and young adult fiction writer and author of short non-fiction for authors. Thanks for joining me for the Hybrid Author podcast, sharing interviews from industry professionals to help you forge a career as a hybrid author, both independently and traditionally publishing your books. You can get the show notes for each episode and sign up for your free author pass over at the Hybrid Author website to discover your writing process, get tips on how to publish productively, and get comfortable promoting your books at www.hybridauthor.com.au. Let's crack on with the episode. Hello, authors. I hope you're all keeping well in whatever part of the world you reside and listen to the podcast in. Today's interview is with sci-fi and fantasy author Phil Asmundson, and he's talking to us on writing character perspective. Phil touches upon the research and elements which make up his fascinating trilogy, how he wrote from a 16-year-old girl's perspective being an older male, shares his tips for authors looking to write from character perspectives other than their own, and tells all on his unique self-published journey and much more. So in my author adventure this past week, I had the literary speed dating event, which was held by the ASA, that's the Australian Society of Authors. And my pitches, I had two, and I chose agent Melanie Ostell and University of Queensland Press Claire Hume to pitch to. And it's done through Zoom with obviously your chosen person and somebody from the ASA facilitating, and you have 3 minutes to pitch to them. And it went really well, although I was slightly nervous. I wasn't as nervous as I have been in the past because I've been putting myself out there for practicing. And with Claire, she said that she loved my middle grade series idea and would like to see my work. So fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting any feedback I can from her, or fingers crossed more. So we'll see how that goes. But I just can't stress enough how absolutely fabulous this opportunity is for authors. And if if you're not an ASA member, become one and join this thing, because honestly, it's a chance to get your work in front of a publisher or an agent face to face, actually pitch them directly. And apart from the conferences and stuff, there's not much out there like this, and it was just fantastic. So honestly, look it up. It gets held often, so highly recommend that. So if you love the podcast or any of the episodes has helped you further in your author career, you can now pay it forward by buying me a coffee over at www.buymeacoffee.com/thehybridauthor. So that's enough for me. Let's crack on with the episode. Phil Asmundson grew up as an outdoor kid who built miles of trails through the woods and created adventures that lived only in his mind. After a 33-year career at Deloitte and Touche, he began researching Southwest myths, discovered the Tuar Tums legend, and brought them to life in his debut trilogy. He's always had a passion for science and is fond of saying, "True science is indistinguishable from magic." Phil and his wife Kim currently live in Arizona, where they own Deep Sky Vineyard and spend their nights looking at the stars. And that's where he joins us from today. Incredible bio, Phil. Welcome to the Hybrid Author podcast.
That's great to be here, Joanne. I look forward to our discussion.
Oh, well, from your bio, it sounds like you've had quite an imagination from a young age. Can you tell us, how did you decide to take the plunge and put these ideas on paper after so many years, building them up in your mind?
I was a very imaginative kid. I love to create things. And yes, I truly did build about 20 miles of trails through the woods. But I found I like to tinker with things and create something out of nothing. And to me, especially when I first started writing, that's what I was trying to do, because I didn't really fully understand writing at that time. But one story I've always told people is one of the things I did in Connecticut was I built miniature golf courses out in the woods. And I would rake the ground and get it all cleaned out. I would use cat food cans for the cups of the golf course. I used coffee cans to create tunnels. I would go down, since Connecticut had a lot of winter, snow, we had sand in the roads in the spring, and I'd dig it all up and bring it That's what I used in sand traps, and I used plastic from construction sites. May have taken that illegally, but it's a long time ago. And that's what I used to make ponds. And so creating things comes naturally to me. There's one thing I learned early on in my life. I was not really good at writing. I didn't really enjoy it. In fact, I didn't really find my love of writing until I went to graduate school in 1990. It was then that I fell in love with the written word, and I started to explore it. Really, it was probably more towards the end of the 1990s to early 2000 that I started writing for personal enjoyment. One of the things I did is I took a crack at writing what I would call children's stories, something called Rosy Tales, but that Tales is Tails. It was about my dog, who was a German Shorthair Pointer, and I wrote these books to be kind of a guide to families when they were getting a dog, how to teach their children to respect the pet as a member of the family. I had a blast doing it. I never did publish them. I basically just gave them away and would customize it for people who wanted it. And instead of having my character's name in there, I put one of their children's names in there. And it was just a ball to do. And I really wanted to keep going, but my career at Deloitte started taking off. I was promoted to a vice chairman, and all of a sudden I was traveling the world. And I kind of stopped writing for a little bit. And it wasn't until about 2009 that I stumbled upon the Tuar Tums. And at that point, I really decided I wanted to start writing. And so I started to look for these ideas. And of course, I found this myth. And we were building a house in Arizona, and I was just researching all these legends, more than just the Tuar Tums, legends about treasure, because there's more legend in Arizona than any other state in the United States. The reason I fell in love with the Tuar Tums is because they were different from humans. They were described as the little people of the Valley of the Sun. And that intrigued me, because if you've ever been in Arizona, you'll see there's craggy hills and very desolate areas. And as I looked up at the mountains that surround our house, I said, I know there's something up in those mountains that are different from us. And so I just wanted to bring it to life. And that was really my aha moment, if you will, that got me to do this. I sat down and thought about it for a while before I started writing it. It was just it was a labor of love, quite honestly.
That is incredible. What a story. Do you still have any of the Rosy Tales little books you made, or they were solely for the purpose of sharing with the community?
Oh, I have all the documents for it, but I would just, there was a custom printer when we lived in Connecticut, and I just go down there. I had some simple graphics. I'm not a very good artist. I mean, I tell people stick men are a challenge for me. So I've always thought about maybe going back there and finishing it, because it was typical things, Rosie finds a home, Rosie's first Christmas, things like that. And Rosie gets lost.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's incredible, especially from such a young age as well. So your debut sci-fi fantasy trilogy, the Tuar Tums, can you tell us a bit about that? Tell us a bit about the book. So it follows the adventures of 16-year-old Alexa Kinner.
Correct. So the story is set in modern time, right now, and but the book actually starts off 65 million years ago. And that was something called the KT event. I'm very deep in science. These books are written to be very entertaining, but also all the science is real. I mean, this is real stuff that goes on. And I've had a lot of people who've read it come back and say, I learned more from reading these books than I ever learned in science class before. It follows Alexa, whose father disappeared 12 years ago to the day that the story starts off. Under very mysterious circumstances. He was a treasure hunter looking for treasure in the Arizona mountains, and he just went in there one day and never came back. And she realizes it's going to be a tough day for her mother because it's his anniversary. And lo and behold, out of the blue, he's discovered in the desert, naked, no idea where he is, but he mutters his name, and then he collapses into a coma. And so all of a sudden, her father's back, and she doesn't know how to deal with this. And Alexa is quite a studious, shy girl, and suddenly she's thrust into a lot of activity around her, and she's not really sure how to deal with it. And it's what happens is her father, Jeff, slowly starts to recover and starts to regain his memory. And so when he does, she discovers that he was with these Tuar Tums, and they are actually not humans. They are aliens from another planet, and they are here on Earth because they're mining a material that they need in order to sustain their planet's atmosphere. This is getting into some of the global type of things. And that material was deposited on Earth in that KT event. And the KT event is what killed the dinosaurs. It was a large asteroid that hit Earth. And so they're here. And so she goes on this adventure to discover where he'd been. And it leads her to Asa, who's the head of the Tuar Tums. And he tells her that her father had been with him on their planet Yandola. And while there, he did something that changed the Tuar Tums, that has split their society in half. And they're about to go to war. Her father was the answer to a first part of a prophecy, but Alexa is the answer to the second part. And if she can't fulfill it, the universe will cease to exist. So she goes off on this adventure, and it just follows her. Book 1 really is about trying to find out what happened to her father. Book 2 is they're racing around Earth, trying to stay one step ahead of, quote unquote, the bad guys. And she's learning all about these new forces that are all around her, the 4 forces, which, surprisingly, unless you're really deep into science, very few people know what they are. But they're 2 are very obvious: gravity and the electromagnetic. The other 2 aren't so much. So it's the strong force, which is the force that holds the nucleus of an atom together, and the other is the weak force, which allows for different elements to be created because it transforms something that allows you to build heavier and heavier and heavier elements. And without those, there would be no lights in the sky, there'd be no life, there'd be no planets, there'd be nothing. There would be no matter. And yet she's going to learn to control these in a very unique and interesting way, and she's going to have to do it if she's going to succeed.
Wow, that is very intriguing, and very real life topics as well. Fantastic. Is this obviously your passion as well for this subject comes through? Is this these are the kind of books you grew up reading yourself?
I was never a big reader as a young person. I very studious in college. Once I got to college, I read everything. I have a very unusual degree. I have an accounting degree from the University of Oregon. It's a Bachelor of Science because I studied science for 3 of those 4 years in college. But I always knew I wanted to go back and get an MBA, so I took a lot of the lower level business classes. I actually was a geology physics major. And we were, at the time, this was back in the 70s, so we were monitoring Mount St. Helens when it blew. And I think that eruption really launched me into having an unbelievable passion for what was going on in the world, and the power of nature is infinitely more powerful than anything man could do. And so I just devoured all things science, and it just struck me that understanding science, like I was a big fan of like the Harry Potter books, and they were fun, and I read all sorts of things. But, when I read those, I said, wow, this is really creative. J.K. Rowling did an incredible job. And so a lot of the times when I was writing, I said, maybe I can do something like this. But to do that, you kind of have to create a whole nother world. And that's why that tagline I have of science in its purest form is indistinguishable from magic, but infinitely more powerful. That's what I tried to bring out of the book. And so that's what readers learn about, is that, oh my God, gravity is much more than, the apple falling on Newton's head. It determines much of our bodies. It determines our blood pressure. It determines our height. It determines our strength of our bones and our muscles, and all those things. By the way, it also is the creator of stars. The sky would be dark if it wasn't for gravity.
That's incredible.
So I started using all that in the story, and I started pushing it all in. And you have a question of, getting it published, but we'll get to that one later, because you'll find out, man, I was all over the map. I was lost.
Well, honestly, we could go off and talk about so many different things, but today's topic is writing character perspective. And so, as you've stated, the Tuar Tums trilogy follows the adventures of 16-year-old Alexa Kinner. And so how is it you sort of decided on a female teenage protagonist, being an older male? Was it just what came to you, or was it like a targeted decision? Or how have you found writing from that perspective? And has there been any challenges, obviously, writing from somebody completely opposite from yourself, I suppose?
Well, I think I had some advantage, and I had 2 daughters, and I had a son.
Lovely.
And, so the 2 daughters were very challenging, and I learned a little bit about teenage girls at one point in time. But in fairness to them, I travel a lot for business. I have over 9 million miles on commercial airlines, which is disgusting. And so I didn't get to see them grow up a lot. So I was pretty out of touch with what a teenage girl was all about. But the reason I picked a woman, I picked it very early on, is that I was in the technology field. For Deloitte, I was global leader for telecommunications, but I was U.S. leader for technology, media, and telecommunications. There were very few women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. They just weren't there. They're underrepresented. And that bothered me for some reason. I said, wow. And, I don't think I was thinking about it maybe when I first decided to have a female protagonist, but it became all encompassing to me. I really wanted to write this story once I got going to try to get more young women involved in STEM. And so that was a big influence on why I picked a young girl. The second was a little bit different. I am an ardent fan of a show called How the Universe Works. And they have a lot of really good people who speak on that show. But there's one woman in particular, I've always loved her insights and her passion for science. And that's a woman by the name of Michelle Thaler. And I'm actually on Facebook. I'm a member of a group called Get Michelle Thaler her own science program. But, just the way she talked about it and how excited she was about it, I said, maybe that's what we need in STEM. We need more women to come in here and put a little excitement into this stuff. And so, I got right there on day one. So I just kind of lucked into it.
Yeah.
But, it was hard to do. I mean, it really was kind of a difficult process to get there because I didn't really know how to write in the young girl's tone. I didn't quite understand certainly the difference in feelings and emotions that women have compared to men. Now I learned. And so I had to go out and find all that stuff out there. And so, and by the way, just before I forget this, because I will, Alexa actually means defender of mankind.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Perfect name.
I think I had to change that to humankind in the book because, someone would get mad at me. But that is actually what her name means. And I picked that specifically because and I picked that, by the way, before Alexa from Amazon was even around. Because I started writing even before that. But, I had to try to understand the teenager's perspective. I had to do a lot of work to be able to do that. First off, I shared my writing with two of my daughters who gave me a lot of information and quite frankly, maybe too much. They told me, you don't understand us at all. And, I just didn't quite get what they really, what a young girl would be thinking about this. So I started having some friends who had children who were girls, and I had them read passages. I didn't give them the whole book. I just said, could you read this? And here's a dialogue between Alexa and her boyfriend, Jack. Would this be a reasonable conversation? And I just got crazy looks like, what is wrong with you? And so I had to learn. And I asked my wife, and women I worked with who had daughters to give me advice. And, some of the advice I received were things like, they liked characters who were honest and with their feelings. They didn't like people who were, kind of secretive. Men tend to hold our feelings in. Women show their feelings out there. And so I had to learn to do that because from my perspective, I probably withhold some of that. They thought Alexa should be smart, creative, and independent. She wasn't reliant on Jack. She had this new boyfriend, but no, she's in charge of herself. Don't mix that up or you're going to be in trouble. They said Alexa should have a best friend, and I didn't have that originally. And I asked them why, and they said, well, because girls always have a best friend. There's always someone that they want to relate to and share their secrets with and be able to kind of explore the world together. That played a huge role in how I developed the character Sharon, who she calls Cher because they, as they said, they share everything in life together.
That's great.
They also told me hugging is a big part because I never had that in one of my original manuscripts. And I said, what do you mean hugging? They said, girls hug. Because I am a non-hugger. I admit it. I have never been a hugger. There was a woman who worked for me who used to love to hug, and I had no idea what to do. I stand with my arms out away from my body, scared to hell. And so, just all that process helped me. But the biggest one I had that I started off with, which I got totally wrong, was, and as my wife and a couple other people said, there's no way Alexa and her mother have that nice a relationship. She's a 16-year-old girl. They hate each other.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I got it wrong because I just decided that, she only had one parent. And so, maybe that's why I thought they would be closer. But in reality, as I talked to some families that were from one parent and two parents, girls, and I would go down to a local high school and say, do you have a book club? Can I come in here and have some young women read these passages? I'll give them to you. You can read them, and then they can tell me what they think. I mean, the one thing about teenagers is they're incredibly honest, to the point of painful at times. So I had to take all that in, and that really shaped who Alexa became, because it wasn't what I was originally doing. And so I got that badly wrong. That's what you have to learn when you try to take on a role where you're not talking about someone you know really well. You're talking about. At one point, I said, "My God, my daughters are aliens." I mean, I don't even know.
Perfect candidates then.
Yeah, but the reality is they're really magical people, and I enjoyed getting to understand the difference between the sexes a lot. And I wish I'd known this when my kids were growing up, because my kids are all in their mid to late 30s now.
Oh, it's never too late though, isn't it? And it sounds like, even though it sounds like you made a conscious decision to choose a female protagonist, like a young one, to represent more females in STEM, but it sounds like it's almost been fate in a way. And I love how you've gone about, obviously, representing this character, seeking the voices of others, and especially family, and almost, do you feel like it's brought you closer to your daughters? Like you're saying, you understand them a bit more now. You understand the young female form a bit more.
Well, I do, and I've got a second at bat here, because I have 5 granddaughters and 2 grandsons.
Oh wow, so, yeah. Was any of the information ever conflicting? I think it sounds absolutely spot on with what your wife and your daughters have shared already. Especially, I can relate to that a lot. Was any of the feedback that you received from people conflicting, I suppose, of how they maybe wanted the character to be? There were a number of people who they didn't like the fact that when she started off, she was quite shy. She was, her biggest goal in life was to have a straight A average. And they said, well, how are you going to make that person become something ultra powerful? And I said, that's the transformation she has to go through. And she's going to learn to do it with the help of her friends and her family. All through all 3 books, she's constantly questioning herself, but then doing something. And every time she does that, she gets more confidence and more confidence and more confidence. And in the end of the story, which I'm never going to give that away, no,
she has to do something that for all intents and purposes seems absolutely impossible. And yet she sits back, she thinks of all the things she's learned about science and exactly how would I go about doing this. And she comes up with a solution. And so it's nip and tuck. You don't know. There's bad things going to happen, but it was a fun adventure watching, quite frankly, the character evolve, and I didn't really know where it was going, originally. And when I got there, I remember finishing the 3rd book, prior to doing some other proofing and editing stuff. I just sat there and said, "Wow, I cannot believe I did this."
Oh, that's incredible. Well, it sounds like you've shared so much already about how you came up with your character and sort of brought substance to her by researching and seeking people out of that same age. Do you have any tips for authors or hybrid authors listening who would like to write from a different character's perspective, obviously, other than their own, like you have?
Well, obviously, there were 2 lessons from what I just talked about. Number 1 is ask for help. I mean, you cannot do this. It's so hard to step into somebody else's shoes, and that may be one of the problems in the world here. We don't know how to step into other people's shoes and see the world from their eyes, and maybe that's why there's so much conflict in the world. But so ask for help, because people are more than willing to. I mean, when I would tell them, I'm writing a book about a 16-year-old girl, the girls would be like, "Really? Does she look like me? How old is she? When's her birthday?" I'm like, I don't know any answers to those things. But so ask for help, because people are willing to give it. And the second is just know right up front, you're going to get it all wrong originally. It's just not going to work out. It's just, it was that thing with Alexa and her parent being close, because, she only had one parent. Well, I discovered through conversations that, one parent to a child is usually more difficult than two parents, because there's two parents that can bounce it off. And so the child has either their father or their mother to go through, or whatever the relationship is. But when they only have one, they've only got one point of contact, and it never works out quite as well when you can divide it, divide and conquer, so to speak. The other thing I learned, and this took me a while, and if we talk about how I went through this whole process, you'll see why it took a while. You have to understand that every character in every story evolves in one manner or another. And so what Alexa is in the beginning of the story is a shadow of what Alexa is at the end of the story. And so you need to plan on how that's going to happen, because it's going to change the relationship. So in the case of her mother, she struggled with her mother, but then her father came back and she wanted to know more about her father. Well, the only person who had the answers to that was her mother. And so they started to become closer while she was trying to, even before he regained consciousness, trying to understand, like there's a wonderful scene I loved where her mother is telling him about the man in front of them that they both love. She says something, "You might not believe this, Alexa, but you have your father's hair." And she's like, "No, I don't." And suddenly as she starts looking at the man, she realizes that, "Oh my God, I do have his hair." And she tells her that, your father, when you were born, he came in and he took one look at you and he said, "Oh, great, she's got flat ears." And she says, "Well, what does that have to do with life?" He says, "Well, your father had a friend who had Dumbo ears, ears that stuck out. He didn't want you to have Dumbo ears. And to this day, he was always happy that you had flat ears." And, so little things like that started to get her to know her father even before he woke up. And so, it's that type of stuff that she's going. When she starts to get more powerful, here she is. She really does this adventure with three other friends: her best friend Sharon, her boyfriend Jack, and kind of a guide, Derek, who's a Native American Indian. And there's a lot of Native American themes throughout the entire story. I wanted to get that in there as well because I'm fascinated by the Native Americans. Right. They truly are mystical people. As she grows, her relationships with all of them change. And she goes from kind of following Jack to everyone following her. And she suddenly realizes my role is different. They're looking to me. And she's not used to being in that role. So you're going to have to, in any story that's going to happen, so figure out what it is she's going to have to learn along the way and give examples of how she learned it. And, as hard as it was the most wonderful thing to do, to watch her evolve, even to the point there's a poignant line in there when she realizes as she's coming to this, kind of the culmination of the story, that she, has this awful realization that she's going to become a killer. There's no option about it. If she's going to protect the one she loves, she's going to have to kill. And so this is radically different than what she was. And this story takes place only over like 3 or 4 months. Yeah. And so how fast this all happens to her. But it was wonderful to try to get through that process. And I think anyone who wants to do it, you're going to do multiple rewrites more than if you had something typical to yourself. That doesn't matter. Because you come out understanding a whole another group of people that are different from you a lot better because you've kind of stepped into their shoes.
That's it. Yeah. And it sounds like you've really, gone so deep and detailed, and you sound like you're so connected to Alexa and your world, which is incredible. How long did the process take for you to kind of, that too heavy a question, I guess, from the idea to the end of the book or writing? We'll get into the publishing in a minute.
I literally started writing this story probably in 2010 or so, and I wrote it on airplanes. I traveled the world. As I said, I had all those miles on airplanes. When I was coming home from China or Australia or Europe, I would write it on the airplanes. And the problem with that process was I'd have flashes of brilliance, and then I wouldn't touch it for a couple of months. And then I had to come back, and I had to start reading all the way from the beginning again and start all over again. And I didn't truly know how to write. And this kind of goes part and parcel to getting it published. But I paid no attention to standard word count. I just babbled on. And I did a whole bunch of crazy things like all those myths I researched. I just incorporated them all in there. And they became side stories that had no relevance to the real story. And my character development was weak. I was a business writer, not a fiction writer. And so I just was all over the place as I weaved all these different legends into the story, principally because I liked it. Yeah. And I ended up meeting a guy by the name of Mike Garrett, who was a freelance editor, and he and I talked, and he said, "Well, why don't you let me edit your first book?" And he sent me the edit back, accompanied with a 40-page document of things I was doing wrong. And he basically started off, he says, okay, look, this is a 40-page document, and you've got so many errors in this thing, it's a joke. But your storytelling is fantastic. So I had to learn how to do all that. He taught me, honestly, that's how I learned to write, was Mike. He really gave me the discipline to think through all of this. And when I was finally done with him, that would have probably been about 2018. It was still 2 years before I even was ready to publish, because I realized how many errors I went. I went back and rewrote it. And I found, because he taught me what to do, that I now didn't want to accept stuff that shouldn't be done, that it was difficult. I didn't like it. And I find I can't read a book now without editing. And I read major league authors out there, and I can't get through 2 chapters without finding like 7 different errors.
Yeah.
and so Michael destroyed my ability to read for fun anymore.
But he gave you a critical eye, which is something even better.
He did. He really did. And he was a very nice guy who, he read all 3 books, which I told him he's got a real desire for pain. But he said, no, I'm really interested in what you're doing. These are fabulous stories. There's nothing like them out there. And, in fact, he told me I taught him more about science than he taught me about writing. So yeah.
That's incredible. That's amazing. Well, how I read in your Amazon bio that you took an unusual path to publishing your first book. Can you touch on that and the publishing process you've gone through?
Well, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Mike encouraged me to go out and see if I could get a agent and stuff like that. And I had a good friend of mine who's written probably about 50 books, and he's always self-published. And when I spoke to him, he says, you can always find an agent later. Why don't you just go and do some self-publishing? So I said, great, I know how to do this. I'm a tech guy. Well, this all happened in the summer of 2020, and all 3 books were already complete at that point in time, in my mind. But I realized at that point, I had absolutely no idea what the process of self-publishing was all about. None. I didn't understand ISBNs. I didn't understand copywriting. I didn't understand any of that stuff. So I found that I was just getting mired down in details that probably were not really worthwhile for me to worry about. And so I ended up hiring a firm to come in and help me. And they really did everything for me, from a whole nother round of editing, all the proofreading, formatting, cover design, files formatted for Amazon. The list goes on, figuring out the meta words, all that stuff. And I'm like, meta what? This and that. But at the end of the day, I really started to understand how the process worked. But all 3 of these books came out 1 month after another. So it was March, April, and May. And so since that time, I've been doing podcasts and stuff like that. But I haven't adequately marketed them yet. And part of that was a month after we published the 3rd book, my wife and I bought a house back in Connecticut so that's where all our grandkids are. So we wanted to spend more time with them. And then I ended up having some very bad knee problems. I haven't done any of that yet. And this is in fact, I was listening to one of your podcasts where you had the guy I won't remember his name right now, really an influencer on social media.
Oh, Holden.
Yeah, he was fascinating person. So I'm getting excited to do that. And I've got some plans on how to do that. But, the whole publishing thing is still kind of a blur to me, because I literally started doing the re-editing process in November of 2020. So COVID's still going rampant. And here I am doing cover designs in January. And so, somebody asked me what it was like, and I said, I don't know. And they said, what do you mean? I said, it was way too busy and there was way too much going on. And I really don't remember any of it.
Yeah.
But it all came together and it got out there. But now it's time to go to that next step. I got to listen to the Holden interview a couple more times. He's something else.
Yeah, he's incredible here. Influencer, and just shares a lot of himself as well online. I don't know if you've started following him or whatever, but he's got a new.
I haven't, but I should follow him.
It's so it sounds like you've obviously through the publishing route. It's publishing is ever evolving, and especially with self-publishing, there's just so much to learn. I seek a traditional deal for my children's fiction, but self-published non-fiction books, and the the print, audio's my forte, but the print versions has been a whole other ball game. And I have, you can't see behind me here. I've got about 5 copies of one book of different sizes, different this, just all playing around to get it correct. It sounds like it's good that you've gone down, the route where I don't know if I'd call it hybrid authorship. I mean, the company that you went through, would you call them like what would you call them? Are they like a distributor, or do they just specifically help authors publish their books and market them and things like that? Because I know with publishing, you can have they can be traditional houses that actually offer their service, which is kind of hybrid authorship, I suppose. In my mind, hybrid authorship is someone who has the traditional deal with the agent and then they're self-publishing themselves. But there is different avenues for it.
Yeah, these guys were more, I'd almost call it outsourcing. I mean, Deloitte & Touche is a very large, in fact, it's the largest professional private firm in the world, and consulting and all the other things that we do there. Outsourcing would be another one. And so I would call them outsourcing. They're kind of a one-stop, you got to perform your stuff, but then they're going to perform all their stuff. And I just kind of looked at it and said, the time it will take me to learn this is just not worth my time. And there's some things I wish I'd paid maybe a little bit more attention to in class, so to speak. They're a good group. They understand me. They know kind of my background now. One of the things that's come out of this, because I did do a lot of work in social media when I was working. We had basically a media report that kind of reported how media was being transmitted from my media practice. So I had started down a path. Last year, I came up with the idea of the Tuar Tums Science Forum, and what that is that's a less than 6-minute video that takes on science topics, but they're fun science topics. So and I've written 9 episodes. I'm looking to get a YouTube channel in there and figuring out all the other ways I want to distribute it. Probably do a lot on Instagram, tagging all sorts of science teachers forums and physics teachers forums and all that. Because my whole goal, as I say, is to demystify science. It's not to be, science is very scary, wildly complicated formulas and outlandish concepts, numbers that are unfathomably large and unfathomably small. And so I've got 10 episodes already written. I've got a production company who'll help me do them all. I've got rights to videos and images and all that.
Yep.
And so the idea is to get those to come out in the near term, and it's all tied into the book, because in one of the videos, I'll read a short passage in the book that relates to exactly what I just talked about. And so when I say fun things, there's fun things like, why is the sunset red and yellow? Good reason why. Or how old is the light you see outside? And, I kind of tease them along. I say, well, the light left the sun 8.5 minutes ago, so it's obviously more than 8.5 minutes. The honest answer is about 100,000 years old.
Wow.
The photon of the light we see today was born in the core of the sun, and it takes about 100,000 years for it to get out of the sun because it's so massively dense.
Yeah.
But then I get into headier ones like, we'll go through the gravity, the force of gravitation, the electromagnetic force, the strong interaction, the weak interaction. And when I tie them all together, you see that everything around us, everything we see is created by these forces. And I think my favorite one is we're all just stardust.
Yeah.
That's true. All the elements that make up our bodies came from dead stars.
Wow.
So I'm going to use that to try to be a much broader push, kind of like what Holden does. I mean, he's got a really, aggressive way to do it. And I don't know if I'm not as aggressive as he is.
No, it's about, I think, finding your style. And it sounds like you're absolutely on the right track by going through YouTube, Instagram. These are all places where I believe obviously your target audience would reside, and sharing information that links back to your book and the topics. And it's also interesting stuff. And you've got such a passion for it, I can see. So what can we currently expect from you in the future, Phil? Have you got more books in the pipeline following on from this trilogy? Is Alexa Kinner going to continue?
Well,
what can we expect from you?
Well, I don't think I'll have Alexa continue. I have been asked if I would write something on Asa, who is the lead Tuar Tum, the history of Asa. But I think I'd push that back. I've got actually 3 books that I've 2 of them are completely outlined. The other one's in the process of it. One of them's about halfway done. The other one's about a quarter way done. I don't know why I tend to jump back and forth, but I like to take a shot at things that bother me in the world and write a fictional story about it. So there's one of the stories, and these are all tentative titles, but it's called The Deadliest Weapon.
Ooh.
And it's really about the weaponization of social media. And you see what's going on with social media. There's a lot of good things about it. There's a lot of really, really bad things about it. But it's how the whole story starts on the day Kennedy is assassinated, and they've been discussing a plot that is then buried forever. But what happens if this plot gets out and they use social media to create worldwide havoc? So that's one that I really like, and that's the one that's furthest along. The other one though that I really have a passion for is what I call breakfast with an empty chair. I actually thought about this when I was in Sydney, Australia. I was sitting in a restaurant and I was thinking back to an event where I was speaking at a Caribbean telecom conference and how much I hated sitting at a table with no one else with me but an empty chair. This takes a really hard look at mental health. I'm an avid researcher. My research for the Tuar Tums, if you stacked all the papers up, is probably 3.5 feet tall. And I've done a lot of research for both these too, but it looks at, mental health has it's got a stigma. Oh, these are people on drugs, or it's people here. Well, the one who has the mental health problem is one of the most successful CEOs, and he doesn't know it. And it's how he's slowly slipping into it, because there's this chair that keeps showing up at this table that's different than all the other chairs. And one day there's someone sitting in the chair and he's shocked. And that person identifies himself as a doctor who's been sent to talk to him about his mental health. And so that one would be fun to do. And the other one just is called Death of an Individual. And that one, that's the least developed, but one I'd really like to do, because I'm watching the world. We're losing the sense of self for a sense of group. I mean, in the United States, when you look at how the Democrats and the Republicans have gone so far away from each other, and they all believe they all have to vote the same way. Well, no, that's not the real world. I mean, you're an individual. You vote how you believe you should vote. The hell with your party. It doesn't matter. But we're losing that, and there's a lot of pointing the fingers and calling people not very good names without any evidence whatsoever. And so that one will deal with that. And again, all of these are done in a fun way where someone comes upon something and then realizes, oh my God, this is deeper. And as they dig and dig and dig, they discover this terrible thing that's going on.
Yeah. Wow. Well, they both sound very intriguing, and we can't wait to read them when you release them into the wild. And we also can't thank you enough for sharing your time and expertise, Phil. We're finishing up now, but where can our listeners find you and your work on and offline?
Well, I'll be looking for the Tuar Tums Science Forum to be coming out soon. I also have a philipasmundson.com website. The Facebook Tuar Tums got started, and then I didn't quite get there. I've already had one knee replacement this year. I have a second one coming up in September. That's why I say 2023 is going to be my year. I lost 2020 and 2021 to COVID, 2022 to knees. So now I'm ready to go again, but I need to get through one more in September.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, we'll look out for you then. Thank you again. That was fantastic.
Thank you, Joanne. It was wonderful. They're very nice meeting you.
So there you have it, folks, the smooth storytelling of Phil Asmundson, sharing some fabulous tips on writing characters unlike yourself. Next week on the Hybrid Author podcast, we have author and librarian Emily Paul, who's going to share her expertise on the role of a public librarian and how the library system works in Australia. Because in our industry, the book industry, librarians play a vital role in an author's career, almost as much as the booksellers. So we need to understand the ins and outs of their profession to help our own and support each other. And Emily is a fabulous advocate of books, authorship, and she's also a working librarian herself. So that's next week, and that's all for me. It's bye for now.
That's the end for now, authors. I hope you're further forward in your author adventure after listening, and I hope you'll listen next time. Remember to head on over to the Hybrid Author website at www.hybridauthor.com.au to get your free author pass. It's bye for now.